When my family excluded me from Christmas dinner for the third year in a row, claiming there wasn't enough room at the table, I smiled and accepted it. They didn't know I'd spent the last 18 months quietly documenting every lie, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer from our grandmother's estate. While they celebrated with champagne and fake smiles, I was preparing to serve them something far more memorable than holiday turkey. The truth, wrapped in legal documents they never saw coming. Subscribe to our channel for real stories of revenge, justice, and personal triumph. The voicemail came on December 18th, exactly 1 week before Christmas. "Hi, sweetie, it's Mom." Her voice had that practiced cheerfulness that always preceded bad news. "So, we've been doing some planning for Christmas dinner, and with Aunt Margaret's family coming and the Hendersons next door. Well, the dining room is just completely full this year. We thought maybe you could stop by for dessert instead. Around 8? Love you." I stood in my small apartment kitchen in Brooklyn, staring at my phone as the message ended. The same apartment I'd moved to 3 years ago, when my family made it clear I was no longer part of their perfect suburban Connecticut life. The same apartment whose rent I struggled to pay while my siblings lived rent-free in properties from our grandmother's estate. My name is Emma Whitmore. I'm 28 years old. And for the third consecutive Christmas, my family had just uninvited me from dinner. I should have been angry. Maybe I would have been once. But now I just felt a cold, crystalline clarity settling over me like fresh snow. Because they had no idea what I knew. They had no idea what I'd been building. And they certainly had no idea that their comfortable world of lies and stolen inheritance was about to collapse around them like a house of cards in a winter storm. I saved the voicemail, evidence number 47 in my growing collection, and opened the locked folder on my laptop. Inside were 18 months of meticulous documentation: bank statements, forged signatures, property transfers, emails, recorded conversations, and most importantly, the original copy of our grandmother's actual will. Not the fake one my mother had submitted to probate. The real one. The one that changed everything. Like this video and subscribe for more true stories like this one. My grandmother, Catherine Whitmore, had died 3 years ago on a snowy January morning. She'd been the matriarch of our family, a sharp-minded woman who'd built a successful boutique law firm in Hartford and accumulated substantial assets over her 86 years. The family home in West Hartford worth $1.2 million, a vacation property in Cape Cod worth $800,000, investment portfolios totaling nearly $2 million, and various other accounts and assets. I'd been her favorite, though she'd never said it outright. We shared a love of old mystery novels, terrible puns, and the kind of brutal honesty that made holiday dinners uncomfortable. She'd supported my decision to pursue forensic accounting when everyone else in the family thought it was odd and unmarketable. She'd encouraged my independence when my mother wanted me to marry rich and settle down. "Emma," she'd told me during our last lunch together, just 2 weeks before her stroke, "you've got something your siblings don't: integrity. Don't ever compromise it, not even for family, especially not for family." At the time, I hadn't understood why she'd said it with such intensity, her papery hand gripping mine across the table at her favorite Italian restaurant in West Hartford Center. Now I understood perfectly. The funeral had been a theatrical production. My mother, Diane Whitmore, had worn vintage Chanel and cried photogenic tears. My older brother, Marcus, 32 and perpetually unemployed, had given a moving eulogy about Gran's generous spirit. My younger sister, Vanessa, 25 and an aspiring influencer, had posted Instagram stories about family legacy and honoring our matriarch. I'd stood in the back of the funeral home watching them perform grief, while calculating how quickly they'd start dividing up the assets. The answer was immediately. 1 week after the funeral, Mom had called a family meeting at the West Hartford house. I'd driven up from my tiny studio apartment in the Bronx. This was before Brooklyn, expecting a reading of the will, maybe some discussion about Gran's wishes. Instead, I walked into an ambush. "Emma, honey, sit down." Mom had gestured to the chair they'd positioned in the center of the living room, like I was about to be interviewed. Or interrogated. Marcus and Vanessa sat on the sofa, united in a way they'd never been when arguing over the TV remote as kids. My father, Robert, stood by the window, looking uncomfortable but complicit. "We've been going through Gran's documents," Mom began, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to say something terrible while pretending to be kind. "And there's something we need to discuss." She'd pulled out a document, the fake will, though I didn't know it yet, and slid it across the coffee table. Gran left very specific instructions, Mom continued. The house goes to your father and me, obviously. The Cape Cod property goes to Marcus, since he'll need it for his family someday. Marcus had been single for 6 years and showed no signs of changing that. The investment portfolio will be divided between Vanessa and Marcus to help them get established in their careers. I'd stared at the document, something feeling wrong, but not quite able to identify what. And me? I'd asked. Mom had smiled that smile, the one that never reached her eyes. Gran left you her collection of mystery novels. She knew how much you loved reading together. 200 paperback mystery novels, most of them worth about 50 cents at a used bookstore, while my siblings inherited nearly $4 million in assets. That can't be right, I'd said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Gran wouldn't what? Marcus had interrupted. Wouldn't reward the children who actually spent time with her? Who visited regularly? Who didn't move to New York to chase some weird accounting dream? I visited Gran every month, I'd protested. I had lunch with her 2 weeks before she died. Emma. My father had finally spoken, his voice heavy with manufactured disappointment. Your grandmother made her choices. We have to respect them. But something about that document had bothered me. The signature looked slightly off. The date seemed wrong. And Gran had mentioned updating her will during our last lunch, had specifically said she'd made sure everything was in order. I'd left that meeting with nothing but a box of old paperbacks and a growing suspicion that something was very, very wrong. That night, back in my depressing studio apartment, I'd started digging. Forensic accounting was my specialty, after all. Finding hidden money, tracing fraudulent transfers, uncovering financial crimes, that's what I'd trained for. I'd just never imagined I'd use those skills on my own family. I started with public records, property transfers, probate filings, anything I could access online. Then I'd called Gran's lawyer, the one she'd used for 40 years, a man named Bernard Chen, who'd practically been family. Emma, he'd said when I reached him, his voice cautious. I was wondering when you'd call. Mr. Chen, I need to ask you something about Gran's will. There'd been a long pause. I can't discuss the specifics, but I can tell you this. The will that was submitted to probate was not the document I prepared for your grandmother. My heart had stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying, he'd chosen his words carefully, that your grandmother came to my office 6 months before she died and completely rewrote her will. She was very specific about her wishes, and those wishes are not reflected in the document that was filed. Do you have a copy of the real will? I do. But your grandmother gave me very specific instructions about when it should be revealed. She was concerned about certain family members. She wanted to make sure any fraud was fully documented before the truth came out. I'd gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. Mr. Chen, I think my family committed probate fraud. I think, he'd said quietly, your grandmother thought so too, which is why she prepared for it. That conversation had been the beginning of my 18-month investigation. Mr. Chen had given me a copy of the real will, in a sealed envelope, to be opened only in his presence and documented with witnesses. I'd read it 3 times, each reading making me angrier and more determined. The real will left the West Hartford house to me, specifically noting that I was the only grandchild with the integrity to preserve the family history. The Cape Cod property was to be sold, and the proceeds divided equally among all 3 grandchildren. The investment portfolio was to be placed in a trust, with equal distributions to all 3 of us, managed by an independent trustee until I turned 30. Gran had trusted me to handle money responsibly, but wanted to ensure my siblings couldn't pressure me into sharing my inheritance prematurely. There were also specific personal bequests. Her collection of first edition mystery novels, actually worth about $50,000, to me, her vintage jewelry, worth about $80,000, to be divided equally among all 3 grandchildren, and a charitable donation of $100,000 to the Hartford Public Library in her name. But most importantly, there was a letter attached to the will. Written in Gran's sharp handwriting, it explained everything. My dear Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I suspect your mother has tried to steal your inheritance. I've known for years that Diane has been forging my signature on checks, that she's manipulated your father into giving her access to accounts she has no right to touch, and that she's been planning to cut you out of my estate since you refused to play along with her perfect family charade. I've documented everything. I've kept records. and I've made sure that if she tries what I think she'll try, the evidence will be there to stop her. You're my legacy, Emma. Not the house, not the money, but you. Your honesty, your intelligence, your refusal to compromise your values for convenience. Don't let them take that from you. Give them enough rope to hang themselves, then pull it tight. All my love, Gran. I'd cried reading that letter. Then I'd gotten to work. Over the next 18 months, I'd done exactly what Gran had advised. I'd given them rope. I'd documented every lie, every inconsistency, every fraudulent transaction. I'd obtained copies of bank statements showing Mom had been forging Gran's signature for years before her death, making unauthorized withdrawals and transfers. I'd found the notary who'd been paid to witness the fake will, and I'd recorded our conversation when he'd admitted, after enough pressure, that Mom had brought him a document and told him Gran had already signed it, a complete violation of notarial law. I'd traced property transfers and discovered Marcus had refinanced the Cape Cod house, which wasn't legally his, and pocketed $200,000 in cash. I'd found evidence that Vanessa had been using money from Gran's investment accounts to fund her lifestyle influencer career, posting photos of vintage designer items that had actually been Gran's, selling them for cash. Every holiday gathering, every family dinner I was grudgingly invited to, I'd smiled and recorded. I'd asked innocent questions and documented the lies. I'd watched them get comfortable, arrogant, convinced they'd gotten away with it. Comment below what you would have done in my situation, and don't forget to subscribe. The first Christmas after Gran's death, they'd seated me at the kids' table with my teenage cousins. The second Christmas, they'd forgotten to tell me dinner had been moved up 2 hours. And now, this third Christmas, they hadn't even pretended to want me there. Each exclusion had hurt less than the one before, because each one had made me more certain of what I was doing. I'd also been building my own life. I'd gotten promoted at the forensic accounting firm where I worked, moved from the Bronx to a better apartment in Brooklyn, started dating a kind software engineer named David who didn't come from money and didn't care about it. I'd been saving money, preparing for the legal battle I knew was coming. And now finally, I was ready. I opened my email and composed a message to Mr. Chen. I think it's time. Can we meet after Christmas to file? His response came within an hour. I've been waiting for you to say that. January 2nd, 10 a.m., my office. Bring everything. I spent the next week preparing. I organized my evidence into a comprehensive binder. Bank statements, forged signatures, recorded conversations, the real will, Gran's letter, everything. I consulted with a probate litigation attorney, Mr. E. Chen had recommended, a fierce woman named Sandra Martinez, who'd built her career on fighting estate fraud. This is one of the clearest cases I've seen, Sandra had said, reviewing my documentation. Your mother didn't just commit fraud. She did it sloppily. She got arrogant. That's going to cost her everything. What happens when we file? I'd asked. Sandra had smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. We file a petition to set aside the probate of the fake will, contest its validity, and submit the real will. We'll also be filing criminal complaints for forgery, fraud, and elder financial abuse. Your mother could face jail time. And my siblings? Depends on what they knew and when. If they were actively involved in the fraud, they're accomplices. If they just benefited from it, they'll have to return everything, but might avoid criminal charges. I'd thought about that. Marcus had definitely known. He'd been too smug, too prepared with his answers when I'd asked questions. Vanessa was harder to read. She was self-absorbed enough that she might have genuinely believed the lie. I want them all held accountable, I'd said. But I want my mother to face the full consequences. She's the one who orchestrated this. She's the one who betrayed Gran's trust. Sandra had nodded. Then that's what we'll do. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I spent the day alone in my apartment, wrapping presents for David's family. I'd be spending Christmas with them in New Jersey, where I was welcomed and wanted. I baked cookies using Gran's recipe, the one she'd handwritten on an index card and given me when I'd moved to New York. I read one of her mystery novels, a Dorothy Sayers that I'd read a dozen times before. At 7:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. A group text from Vanessa to the Whitmore family chat I was still somehow included in, showing the elaborately set dining room table. Christmas magic at the family home. So grateful for this beautiful legacy Gran left us. The table seated 12. My seat, the one I'd occupied for 28 years, was occupied by Henderson from next door. I screenshot the photo. Evidence number 48. Then I did something I'd been planning for months. I composed a group text to that same family chat. "Merry Christmas, everyone. I know I'm not at dinner tonight, not enough room at the table. But I wanted you to know I've been thinking about Gran a lot this season. About her values, about honesty, integrity, and making sure the truth comes out. I'm sure she'd be proud of how we've all honored her memory. See you in the new year." I read it 3 times before sending. Every word was carefully chosen. Innocent enough on its surface, but loaded with meaning for anyone who knew what was coming. Mom responded immediately. "Love you, sweetie. Wish you were here." Vanessa sent a string of heart emojis. Marcus didn't respond. Marcus never responded to anything I wrote. I spent Christmas Day with David's warm, chaotic family in their cramped house in Newark. His mother, Rosa, had insisted I come, had set a place for me at their table, had treated me like I belonged. We ate tamales and watched It's a Wonderful Life and played board games until midnight. It was the best Christmas I'd had in years. On December 26th, I finalized everything with Sandra and Mr. Chen. We scheduled the filing for January 2nd, the first business day of the new year, and prepared our strategy. "They're going to be blindsided," Sandra warned. "They'll be angry, defensive, potentially dangerous. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been preparing for 3 years," I told her. On New Year's Eve, I got another group text from Vanessa, a photo of her in Gran's vintage Valentino dress, the one that was supposed to be part of the jewelry bequest, to be divided equally among all 3 of us. She'd altered it to fit, cutting off 6 inches of priceless 1960s fabric. "New year, new me, wearing Gran's vintage at the Hartford Country Club tonight. She'd love this." I forwarded the photo to Sandra with a note. "Add this to the evidence. Grand larceny, destruction of estate property." January 2nd arrived with fresh snow and crystalline cold. I met Sandra and Mr. Chen at the probate court in Hartford at 9:30 a.m. We filed our petition at exactly 10 a.m. By law, my family had to be notified immediately. I'd insisted on being the one to tell them. At 10:15, I called my mother's cell phone. "Emma?" She sounded surprised. I never called her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Mom. I just wanted to let you know I filed a petition this morning to contest Gran's will." Silence. Complete, utter silence. "What are you talking about?" Her voice had gone cold. "I'm talking about the real will, Mom. The one Gran actually signed. The one you replaced with your forgery. The one that leaves the West Hartford house to me." "You're insane," she hissed. "You've always been jealous of your siblings, and now you're making up these ridiculous—" "I have the original will, signed and witnessed by Bernard Chen. I have copies of the forged signatures. I have bank records showing you've been stealing from Gran for years. I have recordings of conversations where you lied about the estate, and I have a notary who's willing to testify that you brought him a pre-signed document and paid him to witness it, which is fraud." Another silence, longer this time. "You wouldn't," Mom said finally, but her voice shook. "You wouldn't destroy your own family over money." "This isn't about money, Mom. This is about honoring Gran's actual wishes. This is about holding you accountable for what you did. I gave you a chance to be part of this family," she said, her voice turning vicious. "You chose to move away, to pursue your little career, to act like you were better than us. Don't pretend this is about your grandmother. This is about your resentment." "No, Mom. This is about fraud, and it's about to become about criminal charges. The district attorney is receiving copies of all my evidence today. You forged legal documents. You stole from an elderly woman. You committed probate fraud. That's prison time." I heard something crash in the background. "You spiteful little—" I hung up. Within an hour, I'd received 17 missed calls, 38 text messages, and 6 voicemails. Marcus called me every name imaginable. Vanessa cried and begged, claiming she'd had no idea that Mom had told her Gran wanted it this way. Dad sent a formal text asking me to reconsider this destructive course of action for the sake of family unity. I responded to none of them. Instead, I forwarded all of it to Sandra as evidence of their consciousness of guilt. The legal process moved faster than I'd expected. The probate court suspended the previous order, effectively freezing all the assets. Marcus had to stop making mortgage payments on the Cape Cod house he'd illegally refinanced. Vanessa had to return what was left of the jewelry she'd sold, which wasn't much, but the court ordered her to pay restitution for the rest. Mom and Dad were evicted from the West Hartford house pending the outcome of the case. The criminal investigation took longer, But by March, Mom had been indicted on 6 counts: forgery, fraud, grand larceny, elder financial abuse, probate fraud, and conspiracy. Marcus was indicted on 3 counts for his role in the refinancing scheme. Vanessa, after cooperating with prosecutors and returning everything she could, was given immunity in exchange for testimony. The trial was scheduled for September. But in June, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of years in prison, Mom took a plea deal: 5 years in a minimum security facility, full restitution of all stolen funds, and permanent removal as executor of any estate. Marcus took a similar deal: 3 years, restitution, community service. Dad, who'd been complicit but not actively involved, wasn't charged criminally, but lost everything in the divorce Mom filed from prison. Apparently, facing 5 years in jail had clarified her priorities, and staying married to an enabler wasn't one of them. By August, the probate court had validated Gran's real will. I inherited the West Hartford house. I inherited my third of the investment portfolio, now managed by an independent trustee until my 30th birthday, just as Gran had wanted. I inherited the first edition mystery novel collection, worth exactly what Gran had known it was worth. And I inherited something else: the knowledge that I'd fought for the truth, even when it cost me my family. The day I moved into the West Hartford house, I found a letter in Gran's desk drawer. It was addressed to me, in her handwriting, dated 1 week before her death. Dear Emma, if you're reading this, you won. You fought for what was right, even though it was hard. Even though it cost you people you loved. That's what integrity looks like, sweetheart. It's not pretty, it's not comfortable, and it doesn't win you friends at Christmas dinner, but it lets you sleep at night, and it honors the people who believed in you. I'm so proud of you. Use this house well. Fill it with people who deserve you. Build a life that makes you happy, not one that makes other people comfortable. And remember, family isn't always blood. Family is the people who show up, who tell the truth, who love you without conditions. You'll find yours. All my love, always, Gran. I cried reading that letter, standing in the house that was finally, legally, rightfully mine. This December, this Christmas, will be different. David and I are hosting dinner at the West Hartford house. Rosa and her family are coming. Mr. Chen and his wife, Sandra Martinez and her partner, Cassie, my best friend from college who stood by me through everything, my colleague James, who doesn't have family nearby. We'll seat 15 at Gran's dining room table. There will be room for everyone who matters. And somewhere I think Gran will be raising a glass of her favorite wine, smiling that sharp smile, proud that her legacy ended up exactly where she wanted it, in the hands of someone who understood that the truth matters more than comfort, that justice matters more than peace, and that real family is built on honesty, not obligation. Mom sent me a letter from prison last month. I haven't opened it. Maybe someday I will. Maybe not. Vanessa texts occasionally, careful messages asking how I am, never mentioning the trial or the money or the house. I respond politely but distantly. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't rebuild easily. Marcus, I haven't heard from at all. I don't expect to, and that's okay. Because I learned what Gran tried to teach me all along. You can't compromise your integrity for people who don't value it. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And you can't build a real life on a foundation of lies, no matter how comfortable those lies might seem. The mystery novels sit on my bookshelf now, alphabetized the way she kept them. Sometimes I pull one down and find her notes in the margins, her reactions to plot twists, her arguments with the detective's logic. It's like having conversations with her still. And every time I walk through the front door of this house, I remember, I didn't steal this. I didn't lie for this. I didn't compromise myself for this. I fought for the truth, and the truth set me free, even if it meant spending Christmas alone, even if it meant losing the family I was born into. Because in the end, I gained something more valuable: the family I chose, the integrity I kept, and the knowledge that my grandmother's faith in me was never misplaced. What would you have done in my situation? Share in the comments below and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice and redemption. This Christmas, when I sit at the head of the table in the house my grandmother wanted me to have, surrounded by people who love me without conditions, I'll raise a glass in her honor. And I'll remember what she taught me: that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to demand the truth, even when everyone else wants you to accept the lie. Merry Christmas, Gran. I finally understand what you meant. End.